The world's number one tennis player was deported from Australia on the eve of a major tournament. Hi there, I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where we help you upgrade your English with current events and trending topics. Nothing is more trending now than the case of Novak Djokovic, the world's number one tennis player, and his unsuccessful attempt to play in the Australian Open. So that is what we'll talk about today, January 31st, 2022. This is lesson number 438, and JR, the producer, has uploaded the full lesson to plainenglish.com/438. Well, there's a lot of new and technical vocabulary in this lesson, so if you're a member of Plain English Plus, you might want to take a look at the translations that are built right into the transcripts on this one. And those are available in 9 languages. If you're not yet a member of Plain English Plus, you can sign up today and get those translations by visiting plainenglish.com/plus, PLUS. Now, the English expression that we'll review today is on the eve of, and we have a quote of the week from the actor Sidney Poitier. Let's get going. When Novak Djokovic boarded an Emirates flight from Melbourne, Australia to Dubai on January 16th, it capped a 2-week saga in which the tennis star was at first denied an entry visa, then detained at a quarantine hotel, eventually released to practice on the tennis courts of Rod Laver Arena, only to have his visa canceled a second time. He lost an appeal to a 3-judge panel, and he was on a flight out of the country hours after the decision was handed down. The controversial case hinges on Djokovic's contention that he was eligible for a medical exemption to Australia's strict vaccination rules. In November this year, Djokovic, who is not vaccinated, had signaled that he probably wouldn't be able to play in the Australian Open because Australia requires anyone entering the country either to be vaccinated or to have a medical exemption. However, on December 16th, the Serbian tennis star tested positive for COVID-19, and that, he believed, would qualify him for a medical exemption to Australia's strict vaccination rules. And therefore, he decided to enter the tournament. But when Djokovic arrived at the airport in Melbourne, Australia, on January 5th, he was denied entry into the country because he was not vaccinated. Immigration authorities did not accept his recent test as legitimate grounds for a medical exemption. How could that be? It turns out that the medical exemption is not straightforward. Australian immigration authorities may grant a medical exemption in cases where a vaccine would endanger the health of a person entering. Now, one possible reason that a vaccine would be dangerous is a recent bad case of COVID-19. But a positive test by itself does not guarantee an exemption. Now, Djokovic did not suffer bad COVID-19 symptoms, and he was entering Australia to play in an elite tennis tournament. So, in the opinion of Australia's immigration authorities, he was in fine health, and a vaccine would not have endangered his health at all. His positive test, therefore, did not make him eligible for a medical exemption. Djokovic, the number one ranked tennis player in the world, stayed in a government quarantine hotel with refugees and asylum seekers while his case was appealed. After 4 days, a judge reinstated his visa on technical grounds. That means the judge didn't rule that Djokovic was eligible to stay, just that the government hadn't followed the correct procedure in detaining him. So Djokovic was released from quarantine on January 10th and began practicing at Rod Laver Arena, the site of the tournament. He was scheduled to play in the first round on January 17th. But Alex Hawke, Australia's Minister for Immigration, had the right to personally refuse Djokovic's visa even after he had been released. And on January 14th, Hawke did just that. He said that it was not in the public interest to allow the unvaccinated Djokovic to stay. Australia's rules give wide latitude to the Minister for Immigration to make these decisions. The tennis star made a last-ditch appeal to a 3-judge panel. However, the judges upheld Hawke's decision to revoke Djokovic's visa. The judges stressed that they upheld only that Hawke had the authority to do what he did. The judges did not comment on whether it was a good decision or not. Djokovic left the country on the eve of the tournament, Sunday night, January 16th, on an Emirates flight heading to Dubai. There are several other relevant facts to the case. On his entry form, Djokovic declared that he had not traveled from his home in Monte Carlo in the 14 days prior to his flight, but he was seen in both his native Serbia and in Spain during that period. He says the error was an honest mistake. Now, after receiving his positive PCR test on December 16th, he canceled his appointments and public appearances, but he proceeded to have an interview and a photo shoot with a French sports magazine. He says it was a mistake to do that. Since the onset of the pandemic, Djokovic has been a critic of vaccine mandates, and he has lived the life of a global superstar. During that same time, however, Australians have lived under the longest pandemic lockdown rules of any country. Melbourne specifically had 6 different periods in which residents were ordered to stay at home, and those totaled 262 days from March 2020 through October 2021. So even within Australia, state borders were closed for many months. Citizens found themselves stranded either in the wrong Australian states or outside the country, unable to get in for long periods at a time. Today, over 92% of Australian adults are vaccinated with at least 2 doses, and that is one of the highest rates anywhere. While the Omicron variant is spreading in Australia, the country has had one of the lowest death rates of COVID-19 in the world. So that, therefore, is the context in which Djokovic wanted to enter the country without a vaccine. From the perspective of many Australians, Djokovic was an entitled celebrity asking to be exempted from rules Australians have dutifully followed for almost 2 years. And judging from his Instagram feed, the tennis star has barely been inconvenienced by the pandemic. Djokovic has won the Australian Open 9 times, more than any other player in the history of the tournament. If he had won this year, he would also have held the title for the most Grand Slam championships ever. As it stands today, he, Rafael Nadal, and Roger Federer are all tied with 20. The one thing about this that shocks me is that the Minister for Immigration, an elected official, a politician, has the authority to act on the case of a single person. And that is unusual. To me, a politician should write the rules, but not act on individual cases, especially in a high-profile case like this. A politician will be just too tempted to judge an individual based on what public opinion is like. And a lot of the backlash against this decision is about how Alex Hawke was trying to boost his own popularity by kicking out a high-profile person. And I think those critics have a very valid point about that. However, anyone who's paying attention knows that Australia does not fool around with COVID. They are an island nation, and they decided from the beginning to seal the borders, lock down their cities, and keep COVID out. Australians are now over 92% vaccinated. They have paid a steep price. And I just feel that if you want to go there, you need to respect that and respect what they have paid. So now here comes Djokovic, who lives in Monte Carlo, a playpen for the ultra-rich and famous, with his glamorous Instagram feed, doing a magazine interview after a positive test, making a false statement on his travel declaration, proudly declaring he's not vaccinated, and he wants to play for an almost 3 million Australian dollar prize. Well, Djokovic has the right to be disappointed. He has the right to feel singled out by this action by the government. He even has the right to say it's unfair, but I don't think he has the right to be surprised. Today's English expression is on the eve of. Now, strictly speaking, this means the night before, but you can use it more loosely to mean shortly before. At the very beginning of today's lesson, I said that Novak Djokovic was deported on the eve of the Australian Open tennis tournament. In this case, he left the country late at night on January 16th. The first matches were on January 17th. So, in this case, I was accurate when I said that he left on the eve of the tournament. He left the night before the tournament. However, it is common to use this more loosely. I could also say that a controversy around the tennis star's visa erupted on the eve of the Australian Open. Now, the controversy didn't just happen the night before the tournament. It was in the week or two before the tournament. But it was shortly before the tournament began. In everyone's mind, the Australian Open was coming soon when the controversy erupted, so we can still say the controversy erupted on the eve of the Australian Open. Prince Philip, the husband of the Queen of England, died in April 2021. His funeral was on April 17th, 2021. Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, his staff held two parties on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral. The parties were the night before the funeral. And this is controversial because at the time, indoor parties for mere citizens were banned. However, the Prime Minister's staff held two parties on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral. So after the words "on the eve of," you have to put a noun or an event. On the eve of the Australian Open, an event. On the eve of Prince Philip's funeral, an event. A couple more examples. Maybe on a Thursday or a Friday before a long weekend, you got a lot of work assigned to you. In that case, you can say you got a lot of work assigned to you on the eve of a holiday weekend. The event is the holiday weekend. The groom backed out on the eve of the wedding. That means the groom, the man who's getting married, he decided not to get married at all, and he made his decision a day or two before the wedding. The groom backed out on the eve of the wedding. You can also use this phrase to look back in time and talk about what things were like before an important event. In 2008, there was a global financial crisis precipitated in part by loose lending standards. On the eve of the financial crisis, people in America could get loans for houses even if they didn't have any money to pay the loans back. So I'm looking back on the period shortly before the crisis when I say on the eve of the financial crisis. It's also possible to look forward and speculate that today we are on the eve of something that will happen in the near future. For example, every year, scientists publish a list of animal species that are on the eve of extinction. That means they appear to be close to extinction. I was looking for examples online and found this question. Is the world on the eve of destruction? That means, are we in that period right before total destruction? I hope not, but I think that question came from an old song called Eve of Destruction by Barry McGuire. Today's quote of the week is by the late actor Sidney Poitier. He says, "A person doesn't have to change who he is to become better." Sidney Poitier was born in the Bahamas and was one of the only prominent Black Hollywood actors in the 1950s and 1960s. He died earlier this year at age 94. You can see him in some classics from that time, including In the Heat of the Night, A Raisin in the Sun, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Sidney Poitier again says, a person doesn't have to change who he is to become better. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is a great movie. It was about an interracial marriage at a time when that was still very much a taboo in the US and around the world. The posters from the time called it a love story for today, about changing values. It was released in 1967, just 6 months after America's Supreme Court struck down laws in 17 states banning interracial marriage. So interracial marriage became legal, and 6 months later, this movie came out. It's a good movie. Well, that's all for today's lesson. Congratulations on reaching the end of the audio portion of today's lesson. I say the audio portion because there is so much more to discover online. Plain English Plus members have access to a step-by-step video lesson. There are also exercises, quizzes, and more. So if you're not yet a Plus member, you can join by visiting plainenglish.com/plus, Plus. But look, if that's not for you, that's okay. The free audio version will always be here for you every Monday and Thursday. Well, the next lesson will be this Thursday, and it's all about a new psychological disorder that, for the first time, is included in the World Health Organization's manual for diseases and disorders. But not everyone thinks it should qualify. That's coming up on Thursday. See you then.